Good afternoon. The people that stayed to the bitter end. This is great. I appreciate it. We had a great 4 days. I know we're all bushed. I know none of us stayed out late. I know none of us did anything fun last night, like go to the Hyatt. So thanks for hanging in there with us. It's been a great 4 days. I think some great themes have emerged, and especially towards today, I'm really glad that acceleration was the last day so that we could take all of the different topics, wrap them together, and really talk through the pieces of acceleration. We have 2 treats for you to end the day. So for getting to stay and be the ones that made it to the end, you get two of the best events that we're going to have the whole show. We've got a great panel coming up, and instead of having to deal with somebody like me moderating, we actually have somebody that knows how. So Susan McGinnis, the anchor and managing editor from Energy Now, is going to moderate this last panel and introduce them, and I'd like to invite the panel to the stage. And while they're coming up, wanted to let everybody know that Anish Chopra will be doing our closing, the CTO for the United States. Will do the close and issue a closing call to action today. But as we let the panelists come up, I want to let everybody know that this has been a great week, and I appreciate everybody's input because the collaboration piece and the things that actually got accomplished. We actually worked through some standards work this week in an ad hoc fashion, had a bunch of people come together, had some pretty interesting conversations around consumers, and even a few interesting conversations around networks that started yesterday and seem to be kind of moving on through. So thank you all for hanging in there, and with that, Susan, take it away.
Chris, thank you so much. I really want to thank you guys for inviting me to be here and cover this great event and moderate this really compelling panel. As Chris said, just a quick note about us. I am the managing editor and anchor for Energy Now, and you might see us in the back of the room there covering this event as well. We are a half-hour weekly TV show here in the DC area. It's on Sunday mornings at 11. It's called Energy Now. It's on Channel 7, and it's a half-hour magazine-type show that covers in-depth stories in a magazine style, all about energy and the environment, and we have great panel discussions and in-depth stories about some of the most critical issues that affect us regarding energy. Smart grid is our bread and butter. This is the one of the main things that we cover at Energy Now, and so it's a real pleasure to be here moderating this event. So for the next hour or so, we are talking again about acceleration of the smart grid, putting the smart grid on a fast track to implementation. It's a goal of the administration. It's certainly an interest of everybody that's here today. The idea is that from the technologies to the rules and the standards and the different policies, that so many of the pieces of this puzzle, while a lot of it's still a work in progress, are in place. And so now it's time to put our foot on the accelerator and to try to get this implementation underway. So we have a group of people up here who are very interested in that as well and very well equipped to discuss these issues. John Wellinghoff is chairman of FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. George Arnold is with he's a national coordinator for smart grid interoperability at NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Jerry Cawley is president CEO of NERC, North American Electric Reliability Corporation. Mark McGranigan is from EPRI. He's EPRI's Director of Smart Grid and Distribution Research and also a member of the SGIP Governing Board. You guys have really long titles. You guys would never make it onto Energy Now because we'd be out of time before I get through your names. Hank Ketchington is with DOE. He is Deputy Assistant Secretary, Research and Development with the Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability. So thanks to all of our panelists for getting here. And let's jump right in. Everyone, feel free to engage with each other on any of these topics that we're talking about. And I thought, George, maybe I would start with you because I thought these rules and standards start with you. And before we get to the idea of acceleration, I thought maybe you could give us an idea of the current timeline at NIST. I mean, and when we talk about trying to accelerate the process, tell us where we are.
Okay, sure, Susan. So, NIST has, as a result of a year's work that has involved hundreds of companies, thousands of people, we published a Release 1 framework for the smart grid early this year. It really lays a very good foundation. I would say where we are is we kind of have the rough framing, of the smart grid, but there's a lot of work, there's years of work ahead of us to fill out, get all the finished work done. A lot of the standards that we identified are still in process. They're undergoing revisions to meet new requirements in the smart grid or fill gaps. And so we're directed to recommend to FERC when the standards are ready to consider. And as I think people know, we've just identified a first set of 5 that are really foundational and we think are ready. So we have a lot of work ahead, but we're moving, I would say, at about twice the rate that the telecom industry develops standards for what are called the next generation networks, which are these broadband networks that have TV, internet, and voice service. We have figured out where the bottlenecks in the standards process are, how to apply resources to get things moving quickly, and we really need to accelerate because the pace of innovation in the electric grid is just so slow compared to what it has been in other infrastructures. And the tradition in the grid has been based on a lot of proprietary stuff that doesn't work together. And to change that paradigm to move to open standards and interoperability, we really need to press very hard.
Well, it certainly is no easy task to try to accelerate the process with all of the different pieces involved. Give us a sense, John, of the timeline at FERC for implementing all of this and accelerating it.
Certainly, Susan. And as George mentioned, they just gave us a group of 5. And correct me if I'm wrong, George, but as I understand it, these 5 are actually suites of standards. There's actually multiple ones in each one of the 5. So we have lots of them, but they're in a group of 5 in essence, and they've sort of handed those over to us. And so our responsibility under the Act is to take them and to promulgate them into rules. And so they can be rules that are actually in place and done under our rulemaking authority that can give the industry some certainty. So they've just been handed off to us just very recently here last week. We now need to take those and formulate them into what we call a notice of proposed rulemaking. So we need to look at what we've been given, see how we can formulate it into a notice, and then issue that notice out for comments. We have a comment period from the public because there were, I don't know, some 700 or more people that were involved in the process with George, but that doesn't mean that there are not other people out there who may want to comment. So unfortunately, we still have to go through this next step to officially make them into a rule. We get those comments. Depending upon those comments, sometimes we allow for reply comments. We haven't made that decision yet. But then ultimately, once we do have all the commenting done and potentially reply, then we formulate it into a final rule and issue the final rule. Now, just to give you from a historical perspective, I mean, FERC has been able to do rules as quickly as 6 months, and sometimes it's taken 18 months or more to do a rule. But I'm anticipating, since George and his people have taken so long, and not necessarily long, but taken a good period of time, and that wasn't a criticism of George. I'm just saying they've done a lot of work. They've done a lot of work for us, was my point. They've done a lot of work for us to have a lot of arguments about what needs to be done and not done. So hopefully what we have now, there won't be that much comment on, and there won't be that much controversy. And if that's the case, then I anticipate we could move very quickly, closer to the 6-month part of that spectrum as opposed to the 18-month. But I can't, give any guarantees. It's just a matter of what will happen with respect to the number of comments we get and how controversial the aspects are. And I don't have any good sense now whether or not they will be that controversial, but I assume, given they've already been through a long process, it shouldn't be that difficult.
Give us an idea, Hank, of what's happening at DOE and how your processes can help with this acceleration.
Well, we've actually been working on developing a vision and working with utilities and with the private sector for several years now. And I think with the Recovery Act of last 2009, which laid out $4.5 billion for the smart grid, will certainly help jumpstart the smart grid, which is really part of a whole portfolio of building a low carbon, sustainable energy economy across the nation. So over the last year and a half or so, a lot of our effort has been in rolling out about 130 projects, 99 projects for the deployment of smart grid actually out into the infrastructure, about 30 demonstration projects. But we also realized up front that building out the smart grid was more than just about technology. So it's more about, it's about educating end users. It's about building out the standards, protocols, and also workforce development, because we're going to have a whole new skill set that will be required to roll out the smart grid. So, but the projects under the Recovery Act, the projects we're funding anyway, will be 3 years long in implementation, but we'll be collecting data for 5 years. And I think those projects will really help accelerate the smart grid as the successes come to bear and the data is published, and that will be available on smartgrid.gov for all to take that data and look at it.
Okay. Mark, tell us a little bit about EPRI's role and talk about this collaborative model that you guys work with.
All right, thanks a lot, Susan. And for one thing, we work very closely with Hank and DOE in terms of identifying the research priorities. We're a research and development organization with membership of utilities mainly, but also some vendors in some parts of our program. Really, we did the work that laid a lot of the foundation for the standards, and the group of 5 standards that George handed over to FERC this week, the foundation work for that was done at EPRI, and we continue to work with NIST in the standards area. But from an R&D perspective, there's also a lot of issues and problems still to solve, and we continue to work on that, both from, they get identified in the standards work, they get identified in the demonstration projects that DOE is funding, and we prioritize that work with our members and try to feed the results right into the standards process. So all of that together, is what's needed to help accelerate this process. We got to, address the issues from a technology point of view, from an infrastructure point of view, from an architecture point of view, as we go along, get the technology right as well.
Okay. Well, Jerry, is there anything going on at NERC that you see can help this process?
Yes, thank you, Susan. And first, I have to take a little exception to George's reference to the industry being a little slow to adopt technologies. In my lifetime, in my career, I've seen control centers go from manual switches and analog to computer systems, and now driven a lot by fairly modern servers and computers. Most of the system has, the protection and control systems have been digitized as well. So I think the challenge is really this new frontier of smart grid. How do we get the industry moving into that? I think we have a series of historical transitions where the industry has been able to adapt. But the question is, how do we make this phase into smart grid? And the industry is always focused on affordable and reliable electricity, so I think we have to make that part of it. In terms of NERC's role, one thing we do is standards. We have a set of standards for cybersecurity of the bulk power system that have been in place for a couple years, and they're mandatory and enforceable and approved by the FERC. George and I were talking earlier. One of the things I think we need to do is to make sure that the cyber standards at the bulk power level are integrated with the distribution and the smart grid technologies that come in, because we took them initially as protect the grid, but looking at it as just the bulk power and not the rest of the system. So we will be working with NIST and other organizations on getting those standards more closely integrated. We've also we're one of the pioneers with Department of Energy in introducing phaser measurement units, and which are the modern measuring devices for the bulk power grid, going from a fairly small number of those to several hundred of them, covering the entire grid and allowing us to do some modernizing of system stability and reliability assessments on the grid to help modernize it. The third thing that we do is we're a forward-looking organization for reliability. So we're always looking 5 years out, 10 years out. As we integrate renewables and smart grid technologies, what do we have to do at the same time to make sure that we continue to provide reliable service to customers? So we publish reports on that periodically.
Well, with so much needed to be done, it seems that nobody is opposed to acceleration. I'm just trying to figure out who can speak to what is needed for acceleration. Everyone seems to have very tall orders before them. Certainly cost is an issue, manpower is an issue. What do we need to get this accelerated?
Well, I think one thing, sort of as an overarching thing, is I think we need continued and more collaboration and coordination among all of us, and I think we're doing that all very well now. One of the chairs that we don't have at the table here are the state regulators, and the state regulators, I think, are essential to the whole process, certainly for cost recovery and implementation of this at the distribution level. And we at FERC are working very closely with the state regulators. In fact, we've formed a collaborative at the NARUC, the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, with them in something we call Smart Response, which has actually been a combination of a smart grid collaborative and a demand response collaborative. And so in working at that, we want to make sure that when we promulgate rules at our level, that those rules are consistent with and compatible with whatever rules the states may promulgate, because they in fact may promulgate rules on their own with respect to the distribution system regarding smart grid. So in that vein, in Atlanta, in the middle of November, NARUC is having their meeting, their annual meeting, and we're convening a meeting actually on Sunday morning, I think it's on the 18th, 17th or 18th of November, to have a discussion about this issue of coordination and collaboration between the federal level and our federal regulatory process on the smart grid rules and the state process with respect to the state rules as well.
All the states are going to be there for this?
The major states will be there. Typically, most of the states attend these meetings, and certainly the ones that will be looking at promulgating rules, the large ones, California, Massachusetts, Illinois, Pennsylvania, et cetera, they'll all be well represented. So that will be part of the process. The more that we can collaborate, I think the faster we can move along.
Right. I mean, would you say that it sounds to me like that's one of the biggest bottlenecks? I mean, it just sounds like it could potentially be chaos with 50 different states
Yes.
and federal regulators.
It could be, and we want to avoid that train wreck ahead of time. So, and I have to give people like Paul Centinella, commissioner from Ohio, a great deal of credit, because he's the one who really suggested that we get together in this collaborative effort on this particular issue, and really pushed it very hard with his own state colleagues, and so he's been the one leading it up on their side.
Right. Hank, what about the stimulus funding? You mentioned it earlier. It's out the door. I mean, can it be used to accelerate this process?
I think I need some training to accelerate using this little button. I think really in the end, it's going to be the consumer that's going to be the one that's going to accelerate and measure success. We got to be able to deliver benefits to the end user. But through the stimulus funding, I think we can jumpstart some of this. But it's also one of the largest projects ever where we'll be collecting data on the implementation. So this data will be rolling out and being shared amongst all stakeholders. So we'll actually be able to see the benefits as this rolls out across the nation. This will be a first time ever. So once you can see success, that'll build on success.
Right, and certainly consumer is a big part of that. Jerry, talk a little bit about what you think is needed on the part of the consumers who seem to be kind of waiting for this revolution to sort of happen to them, but you kind of think that they need to, you were talking about consumers needing an iPad moment where they've got to have it.
Yeah, we've been very successful, I think, not only in North America, but in all developed countries of providing a very reliable, affordable electricity service. So everyone thinks of it as just assuming it's there, just plug in your device and go, and you have a reasonable bill at the end of the month. What I think we're lacking, we're lining up all the pieces here, standards, we're lining up incentive funding, but I'm not sure at this point that we've convinced the customers that this is the right thing to do. And I think it's more than just communications and sales and flyers in the mail. I think there's going to be a transitional moment sometime in the not too distant future where we have the smarter appliances available, we have smarter control systems and communications within the business and residents, that the customer is going to wake up and say, now I can change my daily life, how I interact with my devices and appliances in my home or my office, and say, well, I'm going to be much better off to have that. And it's not sitting around looking at a price meter and going over to turn your thermostat back. It's all about automation and quality of life. I mean, a few years ago, I didn't know what a DVR was, and now I won't live without one. And we have to have those moments. I say an iPad moment. I mean, Apple, last I heard, is 130 to 150 million iPads, and everyone has to have one. At some point, we're going to have that. So I'm saying that from two respects. I think that's going to be the pull transition. We can push it out, but the pull transition is the light bulb going off for the customer. I have to have this. And the second thing is, when that happens, it's going to happen very quickly. So we need to have the infrastructure in place, the communications, the devices in place, and the distribution system for that moment. And I'm hopeful that vendors, suppliers, I've heard about Microsoft and Google, but whoever's going to deliver the services in the home, once that fire catches on, it's going to be tough to tamp out.
I mean, when you talk about getting down to that level, I guess we're, Mark, tell us about the utilities' role in this and incentives for them to get it moving.
Well, I think I'll go back to Chairman Willinghoff's comments, because the utilities' roles really get approved by the regulators. The utilities are very anxious to deploy the smart grid. They're ready to make the investments, but we have to be able to explain the benefits and the value proposition of those investments to the regulators that approve those investments. Now, all of the demonstrations that are going on around the country, this is going to be a great benefit, and I think will be an accelerator. One of the things that we did to help with that is DEPRI and DOE together developed a cost-benefit assessment method that's going to be applied to virtually all those demonstrations. And hopefully one of the things that will come out of it is tools that we can use to explain the benefits and demonstrate the benefits to the regulators, so we understand the costs that are incurred and the potential benefits, so that we can go ahead and make these investments. But utilities are the enabler, you know, of a lot of these services for the consumers that we're talking about. We have to put in the infrastructure to allow the consumers to participate in energy markets and be part of managing the demand and be part of integrating renewables. And there's a lot of investment required to do that. So, and right now, there's still a lot of question marks around that in terms of the regulators. It's a very challenging role that the regulators have. With limited staff, they have to figure out whether these investments are really in the best interests of constituents in every different state. Mm-hmm. And that's another important thing about the whole smart grid aspect is it's really, there's a lot of different smart grids. You know, as you look around the country, a lot of different architectures and a lot of different market structures and different situations in terms of renewable integration and how fast electric vehicles will be integrated. So it's not one answer fits all. So, you know, all these different regulators have to kind of look at each one of the situations and make the decisions about, you know, when the investments are appropriate in those environments.
Well, what are the biggest hurdles? I mean, is it integrating renewables? Is it transmission? Or where are the largest bottlenecks?
I think, just picking up on a comment from the chairman and also from Mark, in the regulatory arena, one thing that will really help accelerate is clarity of direction. I've heard recently at a conference with a lot of utility folks, the winds are swirling, but we need to have them go in a single direction. And the challenge is really to have federal policy with some setting incentives and doing the DOE projects and so on. But if we don't have a common goal and common set of purposes really across the whole regulatory framework, then I think we're going to be challenged. And one of the regulatory policies I think will be key to the next step is variable pricing for consumers. We've taken limited steps in that, but I think, back to my point earlier about this becoming of a value for customers, being able to return money to their pockets, then I think we have to have that as a policy that we're going to get there and do it with some kind of regulatory commonality here and not in different directions.
And Susan, if I may, on Jerry's point and Mark's about utilities and their need for some certainty from regulators and some leading the way there. And FERC has been trying to do that at our level. Of course, we have authority over the wholesale markets and over interstate transmission. And to the extent that we do approve rates for interstate transmission, we've been given the authority by the Congress in the 2005 Energy Policy Act to provide incentives for certain types of transmission investments. And one area where we can provide incentives is what is called advanced transmission technologies, which include the type of things Jerry was talking about, phase monitoring units and others. So we have been very consistent at FERC when someone comes in with these new transmission projects, even though we haven't got rules and regulations yet in place for the smart grid, we've told them if you meet certain general standards of interoperability and cybersecurity, we will in fact give you incentives, and we have been doing that so they can start to deploy these things even ahead of us actually getting the rules in place and try to accelerate it early if we can. So we're doing that at the federal level and hoping that my state colleagues will do it at the state level as well. And I know that a number of states have already approved a number of smart grid investments that have been also assisted by DOE with some of their grants.
You mentioned also cybersecurity there. Can you talk a little bit more about concerns there being addressed and cybersecurity issues being enforced?
Well, another one of the first things that FERC did while George's group was initially starting to develop their standards, the FERC Commission issued a policy statement with respect to those standards to provide some guidance, and that guidance included a certain set of overriding principles, and one of those primary principles was that those standards should include very strong consideration of cybersecurity. So we have concerns there, and as Jerry mentioned, we work very close with NERC, where NERC has actually been developing the cybersecurity standards that we ultimately have approved, and we want to make sure that those standards, as Jerry says, it's very important that those standards are consistent with the cybersecurity standards that George has delivered to us, and the two can work together, both at a federal level and also down at the state level. All that has to integrate, so we are concerned about this integration, and so I think it comes back to my initial point where that cooperation and collaboration then is absolutely essential to make all this work, especially in the cybersecurity area.
If I could just add to that, the collaboration is really essential, and you really have to look at cybersecurity on an end-to-end basis and cover not only the bulk power system and transmission, but all the way down to the distribution level, and even the customer. With smart meters and smart appliances, that's all part of the system, and that needs to be secured. So when we talk about acceleration, I would say the one area that we are taking the time to do this right is in the cybersecurity, because what we've learned in the IT industry is that if you don't have the right architecture, you'll never have a secure system. You'll be patching it, and it's going to have vulnerabilities that you can't correct. So, we just a month ago released one of a cybersecurity guidelines for the smart grid, which we've gathered together nearly 500 of the nation and the world's experts on cybersecurity to help us develop these guidelines. And it's really sort of the top-level guidance. There's a lot that needs to be fleshed out, but it does provide the basis for doing this right, if you will. And each of the standards, part of our process in assessing whether standards are really ready for FERC and other regulators to consider is a very detailed assessment of the cybersecurity aspects of the standards. So that's something we're paying a great deal of attention to.
And something that will definitely take time. Somebody was talking about workforce development. I mean, certainly this smart grid future is going to involve a specialized, well-trained, large workforce. Can anybody speak to the readiness of that or the prospects for accelerating that?
I think one of the big issues that we have, and we really started seeing this, I would say around the 2000 Y2K really, is in the power systems world, we're really seeing this convergence of the IT systems and the power systems. And we've been working with utilities and the private sector for several years to look at the cybersecurity related to control systems and SCADA systems. And now, of course, we're going down the smart grid all the way down into the home area networks. But this has been a kind of a concern all along. We have different cultures there, the power systems engineers and the IT engineers. And they're actually two different worlds. Cybersecurity for desktop computing and cybersecurity for electrical power systems are two different things. But some of the challenge here in the workforce development is bringing those worlds together at that nexus and developing unique solutions to some of the problems.
Hank, setting all these standards here and globally, tell us about is acceleration of the grid also a priority of the administration? What's your sense?
Actually, when you sit back, there's been a realization to create a low-carbon economy, we'll need more variable renewable power, things like wind, things like solar. And so how do you get that power to the end user? The critical piece here is, and I'll say the electricity delivery system, not just the grid, because there's other ways to get electricity to the homeowner versus a big grid. So it's really a challenge if we're going to get these low carbon generation sources to the end user, is to have this linkage of the grid. So it is a priority for the administration and for the department to build a more efficient, optimized system that can help you get the low carbon resources out there.
But I think the priority of renewables and clean energy is closely connected to smart grid. And I think that's the one train that is leaving the station or has already left the station. As I mentioned, we do periodic studies of the future reliability of the North American resources and system. And our most recent reports, which are coming out this week, show a dramatic shift in the next 5 to 10 years from coal, some units that may not be economic to retrofit, and to close to 200,000 megawatts of wind in the queue ready to come on. We don't know that it will all be there, but I think this is the train that's left the station. Is renewables are coming, clean energy is coming, and the only way to deliver it to the consumers is through a smarter grid. So we have to be able to have regulation, frequency response, and controls that allow us to deal with the variability and different nature of these resources. We're seeing demand-side response come in and play a role with that, where the customer's loads can vary in response to the availability of some of this generation. So if we talk about renewables and clean energy, the policies are very closely tied with smart grid, and I think it's the one impetus we have now that's real in front of us that we need to address.
So it's almost like the renewables are going to drive this acceleration.
Yeah.
Is it kind of like, whichever renewables are the most ready when the smart grid leaves the station are the ones that are going to be the winners?
Well, the renewables are driven by cost and regulatory policy. So if there are policies on standards for certain types of renewable, that's one factor. But then the utilities will try to put in what's the most economic that's responsive to their demands. But all of those resources have different characteristics and different control requirements than our traditional fleet of generation that people are used to, that steady electricity at the wall that customers have gotten used to.
Right. I want to talk a little bit more about the customers. And George, you were talking earlier sort of about consumers having to understand the value proposition and believe it.
Well, this is something that we are focused a lot on in the standards work. And, one of the benefits of the smart grid is making a lot of real-time data available on energy usage. I mean, today consumers see their energy usage once a month in a bill. Often it's an estimated bill, right? So the smart grid is going to enable consumers to have access to near real-time information about their energy usage, and studies have shown that where you do that, consumers conserve. And so we're developing a standard through NASB in a very, very rapid time scale to standardize the information that's going to be available to consumers on their energy usage to allow this conservation behavier. And we don't envision that consumers are going to be checking their iPhone. I mean, a few of us will, but most consumers are going to want it automatic, right? Set it and forget it. And we'll have smart appliances or home energy management systems at reasonable prices that can use this information to to do a better job of managing energy. So, but it all depends, you know, like on the internet, the way that we are able to have all these wonderful apps that we love so much is because there are standards, and application developers can develop, you know, innovative applications because they're standardized, you know, data models and languages and so forth. And so we're creating those standards that will allow this sort of innovative, competitive marketplace of applications to allow consumers to save money.
Just want to add to adding the renewables to the system is we're going to need more cost-effective energy storage systems at the utility scale. And one of the things through the Recovery Act that we're doing is the amount of energy storage that's out there today will be increased by a factor of 10. So if we're going to accommodate this variable intermittent power sources, we need to have more cost-effective energy storage systems. And that's a big effort on the department side, as well as ARPA-E's investing in technologies, as well as new battery technologies.
How close are we to, this is off subject, I guess, but true battery storage technology? I mean, it is a part of this picture. Storage of renewable energy.
We still, there are systems out there, 1 megawatt, I think is probably about the typical size. They're going up to, I think, well, if we talk about pumped storage, now we get the large storage systems, but there aren't that many areas in the U.S. or in the world where you can have pumped storage. But there is storage available. What we need to do, though, is make it more cost-effective, and so it'll be more widely deployed.
Well, I think there's a parallel with the between the renewables and the storage and the smart grid, is that the technologies appear to be there. I mean, we've demonstrated compressed air storage and of course pump storage and batteries, and they on scales from sort of micro at the distribution to large systems, and so the technology is there. It's ready for the taking. So it's a question of really of price and of deployment integration into the system. So I think very close parallel to why aren't we getting smart grid off and running? It's the same thing. We've got to get the motivators, the pushers to make that happen. And I agree with Hank's point that storage is a key for the bulk power part of it, especially to implementing our renewables goals at this time.
And that's, Susan, why I think things like storage and demand response and these other technologies are going to, in large part, be things that will pull the smart grid, because people are going to start to understand, utilities and individual consumers, that if we put in these communication controls and these enablers to be able to switch and control our loads in ways that can utilize them for these purposes for the grid, that the consumers are going to benefit. I mean, for example, there is more available storage in the domestic electric water heaters in this country than there is in the entire pump storage that we have in the whole United States. All we have to do is enable it with the proper controls that will be part of the smart grid. If we were able to enable it, we could probably access it much, much cheaper than we could by putting in additional pump storage or putting in additional compressed air storage or any other type of centralized massive storage system, as long as we had that smart grid technology in place that was being utilized not only for that, but for multiple other purposes, for demand response, for charging EVs, for doing all kinds of other things that the consumers could use it for multiple purposes, but that would be just one purpose that they could use it for, to help them control their rates and be able to have an economic payment for participating in the grid as part of the storage system.
I just want to back that up because, and it's like a vicious circle. We have a policy that we want to integrate large amounts of renewables, both at the bulk level and at the distribution level. As we put in more photovoltaics and we have utilities that are where wind is being integrated at the distribution level as well, there's a limited level that we can get to with the grid structure the way it is now. But storage increases that, and flexible load increases that as well. So being able to use the storage, whether it's thermal storage or electric storage or whatever, at the local level to meet the requirements of these renewable integration, what that does is it increases the value to the consumer. He becomes a more valuable player in the overall market as the level of renewables goes up. So we're doing a lot of work to figure out what the value proposition is now, where we don't have that much renewables to integrate, shifting the demand, saving energy, but that value proposition goes up with time as we try to reach higher and higher levels of penetration for renewables.
How big of an impediment is policy in all of this? We see what happened with climate energy legislation. Is Washington a huge impediment to acceleration here?
I saw a quote from Dick Kelly at Xcel Energy in one article just this morning saying that, you know, a lot of utilities feel handcuffed because of uncertainty in what the policy is. If we just know what we have to achieve, you know, what the requirements are going to be for renewable integration, what the requirements are going, whether there's going to be a CO2 tax or not, but without having this information to do the planning, a lot of utilities are very reluctant to make decisions about investments. So I think policy is absolutely critical, and some consistency in policy is very important as well. Not that that's an easy thing to accomplish, but it's what investors are looking for in moving forward.
And certainly I don't want to speak to administration policy, but regulatory policy from a FERC perspective we think is very important. That's why we're trying to move ahead rapidly on things like policy for proper rates for storage and how storage will be treated on the bulk transmission system. I mean, you can look at storage in some instances it looks like a generator, in other instances it looks like a transmission line. How do you pay for it? How do you determine what its real characteristics are? You know, are we going to look at it only on a bulk basis, or are we going to consider things like the batteries in an EV that's plugging in at the distribution level to ultimately be effectively storage for the bulk transmission system? I think it can be looked at that way. In fact, we're using EVs right now to do things like provide regulation service in PJM. There's 7 cars at the University of Delaware right now that are electric cars that plug in every night. PJM, the grid operator in Pennsylvania, signals those cars with its regulation signal, pings them just like they ping a generator, and based upon that, those cars provide a regulation service back to the grid at the same time they're charging, and those cars for doing that are getting paid $7 to $10 a day. So we need to make sure that we have in place those types of regulatory policies that enable consumers to be able to participate and be part of this economic integration with the grid.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that as well. I don't think there's a yes or no answer to whether you know, policy is helping or hurting. I think it's different in different areas. We're starting to see some improved clarity in the renewables area. I think we're between the federal policy and states, seeing renewables development coming onto the system in numbers we've not seen before. Also in demand side management is becoming what was, I think, originally a concept or a novel idea is becoming a part of the resource mix that we actually depend on in every day. So I think in demand side management and in renewables, I think we're getting some clear direction. The challenges, I think, are in 2 areas. One is in transmission and transmission siting. I think there's still a significant amount of uncertainty out there in terms of the ability to access necessary rights of way and cost allocation associated with transmission. Still, the uncertainty and all that still tend to be challenges. And I think in the other areas, in the consumer connections, as I referred to earlier, is you know, should we be putting smart meters on every building or not? And what requirements are there going to be? What kind of services will be delivered to the customer? It's still a fractured, I think, a splintered policy at this point.
So I'd like to add a little bit to the policy discussion. And when, you know, Jeffrey Immelt, CEO of GE, was at the GridWeek Global Forum, you know, a few weeks ago, and you know, talked about the absence of an energy policy being a real, you know, barrier. And when people talk about not having an energy policy, they're really talking about carbon. You know, do we have a carbon tax? Do we have a federal RPS? And no, we don't have. I mean, Congress has to set those, and we don't have them today. But we actually, when it comes to the smart grid, we actually do have very good policies. You look at ESA, and it's very clear. Congress has, you know, laid down there a very clear definition of what the vision is for the smart grid. It's People don't often think of a big piece of legislation as a good way to describe a policy, but it is there. And the FERC policy paper really provided some very clear direction, and so I can speak for it. It was very clear, helpful to NIST in terms of guiding our effort. One thing we have recognized, though, is that these documents are static. They were generated at a point in time, and that there are a lot of unknowns with the smart grid. As we deploy equipment through the DOE's investment grants, there's going to be a lot of learning. There will probably be a few mistakes along the way. That's the price of progress. And so the policies do need to stay fresh. And Anish will probably talk about this when he speaks, but in June, the White House decided we really needed a more, let me say, dynamic way of formulating or evolving the administration's policy related to smart grid. And so the White House established a subcommittee under the National Science and Technology Council to provide the vehicle for the executive branch, working with with FERC and other regulatory agencies and the states. We're outreaching to the states to take in all of what we're learning as we this deployment evolves, and evolve our policies in a coherent way. Pat Hoffman of DOE chairs that committee. I'm the vice chair, and I think that will be a very good way of capitalizing on the fact that we have 50 states is a real strength. The United States is great at innovation because we get to try a lot of things, and the things that work spread, and the things that don't work, we don't have to repeat the same mistakes twice. So we're going to be taking advantage of all the good work going on in the states and at the federal level to keep these policies headed in the right direction and moving us forward.
Yeah, and I think what we're trying to do as well, there's a number of goals we want to get to, but broadly speaking, the 3 E's, right? The energy, improve our energy security, energy performance, environmental performance, and economic competitiveness. So we need to get the policies right to encourage innovation. And I think just hearing this discussion, you can see it coming out. We're starting to talk about vehicle to grid, new energy storage. We're talking about community storage. We're talking about the Googles, the Microsofts, all those folks. So it's about creating jobs as well. So there's a number of factors that are coming into play here, but we have to get the policies right that we encourage that innovation and give people the chance to fail quickly. Unfortunately, when we're talking about the infrastructure, we make investments today, and those investments tend to be in place for a long time. So utilities are having to make decisions today based on what they think is going to happen 5 years from now. So it's a tough environment, but I think the opportunities are huge.
From a policy point of view, there's also a lot of lessons when we look globally, because the issue of integrating renewables and reducing carbon is an issue, of course, everywhere in the world, and there's all different policies being applied to try to accomplish that, and the same thing applies to the smart grid. So it's one of the things that we're trying to really make an emphasis in terms of that global coordination, whether it's Europe, where they've set a lot of the foundation for photovoltaic and wind integration, and tried policies to encourage that. Some of them have worked good, and some of them have been expensive, experiments. But and we look to Asia and China. I think it's good to keep that whole picture in mind as we figure out what these best policies are as well.
I just wanted to add one thing. I came down a little hard on the transmission issue, but I did want to just give recognition to the work that the Department of Energy and the FERC have done to try to get past that issue in terms of national corridor studies and encouraging regional planning, I think, that looks at a broader, how do we integrate renewables and things like that. So there is work underway to deal with those policies, but I think there's still a tremendous amount of uncertainty in putting the hard dollars down for building transmission these days.
Well, talk about uncertainty has been, I guess, the largest negative we've heard so far. So many of you have been very positive on different aspects of this process and how, the pieces being put into place. What is yet to What is your biggest worry, George? What keeps you up at night when you think about the future of the smart grid, and what could go wrong years from now in interoperability for which decisions are being made today?
Well, so I'll pick one. I mean, cybersecurity is my number one worry, because we just know that if we don't do this right, we depend on electricity for our economy. We have to have a resilient infrastructure, and so I think that I'm not worried that we don't have the technology or the know-how to secure the grid, because I mean, the banking systems that we have, they get attacked hundreds of times a day, and yet we're able to do electronic commerce and all that. We have the tools available. What we don't have that worries me the most are the human resources, because with 3,100 utilities in the U.S. and thousands of suppliers, it takes a lot of work and expertise to take this know-how that we have and apply it to a working system in operation. And it's got to, you can't have one entity do it. It's got to be done by each utility, each supplier, in terms of getting the right security attributes in their products and systems. And so I think the workforce training is critical. We have to have enough trained people who can be applied in this industry in a timely way to ensure that security is real. So I would say that's the thing that keeps me up at night.
And that sounds like there's a real worry that they may not be there. Is that your biggest worry, Hank?
Well, I think we've made tremendous strides even in the last 10 years. Actually in 2005, Department of Energy and Department of Homeland Security and Natural Resources Canada worked with the private sector to develop a roadmap on how to build what we call resilient, survivable systems across the energy sector. And we've been working towards that, as well as a number of other entities, along with EPRI and others, to actually develop more secure technologies, to develop more secure communications protocols, to develop ways to transfer data from trusted networks to untrusted networks. We made tremendous strides in that area. I think what we're able to do now is really more operationalized. And in some ways, this is really an opportunity to drive cybersecurity across the energy infrastructure. Yes, are we on the frontier? Yes, but through the Recovery Act, every project had to develop it, do a risk assessment, had to come up with its own plan on how it's going to implement cybersecurity requirements. We're working with subject matter experts at the Department of Energy through our national labs to ensure these plans are developed properly and they're consistent, and working with the standards as they evolve through the NIST process. So there's been a tremendous amount of effort going in this area. Is it a concern? Yes, it's a concern, because cybersecurity is one of those things you really never know if you got it right, until somebody tries to break in. So it's like, does it feel good? Yeah, it feels good, but until somebody hacks in, you don't really know. It's tough to measure. Am I a level 1, level 2, level 3? I don't know until you actually try and break it. Security is one of those things that it's really difficult to get at. But I think we've started a number of years ago. We brought those learnings along, and we've created a foundation. We're doing work actually at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. We created the Trustworthy Power Grid for the Cyber Infrastructure for the Power Grid. There's a consortium there at the university level where they're doing research and test beds. And we're actually having a meeting in a couple of weeks. There's going to be about 130 people there in industry groups. So again, there's a lot of work going on, very excellent work, some groundbreaking work. So the standards all the way down to the research side, and we're working closely with folks like NERC and others to implement those.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on the comments by George and Hank, because we have an experience with security once. In the late 90s, the industry started adopting internet protocols to conduct a lot of its business, and we thought we knew what security was then, and we took proper steps to deal with it. Then we had 9/11, then we have today's world of security, of nation states doing things and looking at our systems and so on. The threats have changed. What I want to make sure, and talk about what keeps me up at night in the security area, is let's not repeat what we did the first time around, which is we decided to use the internet, and now we're in a mode of always patching and trying to catch the issues after the fact in terms of security. I know there's a lot of vendors here this week probably in the room, but I think security this next time around with Smart Grid starts from the inside out, from the actual devices. It's innate from the control systems and the communication systems. So my encouragement really as we implement this is start with security first. Make it very resilient from security, then start building on your functionality and so on. Because we can't tolerate 20 more years of trying to patch and fix and put barriers on security after the fact and outside of the system.
Mark, is that one of your biggest concerns too?
Yeah. Security is right at the top of the research agenda, working closely with DOE and the whole industry. I think we can get the security, issue baked in. Like, it does have to happen at the infrastructure level. It does have to happen up front. Otherwise, the costs are very large to try to fix the problems afterwards. But in terms of what keeps me up at night, I like to take a step up one level and just look at the investment that we are making, as a country in the demonstration projects and in deployment projects, and this is happening around the world as well. And what I want to make sure is that we collaboratively get the benefits of that investment, that we get the lessons learned, that we take the results that come out of these early deployments and the demonstrations, and we feed the information into the standards process. We have an initiative around that we call the Smart Grid Demonstration Initiative, but I think it's a challenge for all of us that everyone that's involved in the demonstration projects to make one of the priorities in the project to make sure that we get the lessons learned in the cybersecurity area, that in the cost-benefit assessment that gets applied to those projects, that we share that information and get results that the whole industry can benefit from, and that we feed the right information into the standards process. And that's a huge challenge out of this investment that's happening right now.
So I agree with everything that's been said, and I just want to sort of add and maybe reinforce something I said earlier. We have all the technology and tools, and we do need the R&D because the threats evolve, and we have to keep the tools up to date. But you can have the capabilities in place in the products, but if they're not configured properly, they don't work. If you don't have the management processes in place and the management controls and the human resource aspects, attackers will look for the weakest link, and very often the weakest link is in the operations and the people. And so if we don't have the human resources trained and actually applying these practices, it's not going to be sufficient. So I think that the workforce development and getting the trained people as quickly as possible trained, and this is great for the economy and jobs, right? Highly skilled jobs, wonderful opportunity. We have to address that, just as aggressively as we're addressing the technical aspects.
Okay.
And I think too, George mentioned jobs. I think the jobs that we're seeing through the Recovery Act, these are very high-skilled jobs, and they're jobs that are here. They're here, right here in the U.S., upgrading our infrastructure, so it's very important.
We're coming towards the end here. I want to get a comment from each of you, just sort of a closing remark. Maybe tell us what you think the folks here need to take away from this, maybe how close you think we are, how ready, able we are to accelerate this process. John, what do you want these folks to go home with?
Well, I think they should go home feeling optimistic that we do have, as George indicated, the technology. I think we are on the path to collaborate. We have to be careful that we don't have one of these, and what I worry about most would be either a physical, like a cybersecurity event, or a financial event, like Enron. We want neither of those events to happen with respect to the smart grid, so we need to, and there goes my phone, I apologize. So speaking of smart things, so we want to ensure. Hello. I got it. There we go. Sorry. We want to ensure that we don't face one of those types of events, because either one of those types of events could set us back a very, very long way. And I think we are onto a path that if we keep our direction forward, we keep our optimism, and we also are careful in our collaboration and the steps that we take and don't move too quickly, we will get to a place that will be better for all of us, much better for all consumers with respect to the delivery and consumption of energy services at very reasonable costs.
Okay.
So I mean, to me, this is really a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I don't think we've ever done anything like this on this scale before, and we've got the opportunity here to take advantage of American innovation and our approach to this, to learn as we go along and use our ingenuity to do this right. And I think we should all feel really excited that we're part of I think our children are going to look back at this someday and say this was one of the great achievements of the 21st century.
I'm also optimistic. I think it's time to hold on and get ready here. I think the renewable policies will be a tremendous incentive and to application of smarter devices and controls in the system. I think the other great unknown is when will the consumer embrace electricity-related services and pricing. Once that happens, I expect there's going to be a substantial, a rapid turn in our business. But I think we're lining up the technologies. I know all the vendors are out there saying, when can we get this going and start creating these business opportunities. We're working on the standards and the communication network. So a lot of the necessary building blocks are lining up. And I think it's just a question of turning on the incentives through policy, removing uncertainties, and consumer interest and value.
I'll say that I think achieving energy independence and improving the environment at the same time is a challenge that we all face together, and the smart grid is a critical part of accomplishing that. And so the challenge that we have as a utility industry is helping all of our consumers understand how the smart grid plays in that equation and the benefits associated with that. So there's a lot of consumer education that's an issue for utilities. And also from a utility perspective, it is kind of a paradigm shift in terms of all the different stakeholders that are involved here. And the SGIP has gone a long way to helping bring all those stakeholders together. And utilities have to embrace that. And that's a challenge for them as well.
Because that's a disadvantage of going last. There's not a whole lot more to say here, but no, I think that this is a tremendous opportunity. This is I think it's probably the largest single one-time investment in the energy infrastructure ever in the U.S. We need to take advantage of that and do it right, get the technology right, get the policies right, get the standards put in place. Are they there now? No, but we need to move forward on it and just do it right.
Well, it's certainly a massive challenge, and we all appreciate the work that all of you have done to get this smart grid going, and certainly your willingness to try to accelerate the process. I want to thank all of you for your insight. Hank Henchington, Mark McGranahan, Jerry Cawley, George Arnold, and Chairman Wellinghoff, thank you so much for your talking with us today. Compelling.